As we noted last night, there are now new national standards for long-term care in this country. They come to us from the Health Standards Organization, and they're meant to prevent the horrors and the kind of tragedy that we witnessed in long-term care homes in the early part of the COVID-19 pandemic. But these new standards are voluntary. No care home, no province, no territory, nor municipality are required to implement the standards. So will they really do anything to protect anyone? To talk about this, we are reaching out right now to Tamblyn Watts. She is the president and the CEO of CanAge, a national seniors advocacy group. Laura, nice to see you again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So listen, let's begin with the obvious shortfall of these standards. There is nothing mandatory about them. What's your reaction to that?
Well, there's nothing mandatory about them just yet. Remember, it was the standards associations that worked with Canadians and experts all across the country, and I was part of that process. And all they can do is create accreditation standards. That is what they can do. Then it has to go to the government. And this is where we're looking for the provinces to require these standards. That's the piece we're missing. Only Quebec right now requires long-term care homes to even be accredited. So we're looking for Ontario and the other provinces and territories to say accreditation yes and use these ones.
Now, you mentioned Ontario, and Paul Calandra is the Minister for Long-Term Care in the province of Ontario. He already says that he's not interested in watering down what Ontario already has. So does that worry you in any way about the implementation of these standards?
Those comments worry me on a number of different levels. First, that's not what standards do. He seems to be conflating legislation and standards in a way that is concerning. What standards do is create accreditation minimums. What legislation does is create the frameworks for those. So these are complementary. They don't run into each other. The second piece that's deeply worrying is as we are going into that February 7th meeting, those conversations that are happening right now with the federal government and the health ministers, national standards for long-term care and funding them from the feds is on the table. So if he's being dismissive now, that's deeply worrying. I'm hoping it's just posturing and not actually their position.
Okay, so you mentioned the First Minister's meeting, which will take place next Tuesday here in Ottawa. And, you know, given the last campaign, we did hear the Prime Minister, when he was campaigning to be re-elected, he did promise, Justin Trudeau, promised legislating some kind of national standard. Given, and you noted this, that long-term care is a provincial responsibility, do you think a national legislative framework would do anything?
It'll have to be drafted very carefully. And this is my lawyer hat on right now. Obviously, they can't go too deep into provincial jurisdiction, and that's not going to go over well anyway with some provinces, particularly Alberta and Quebec. But what they can do is create a framework where they give money. And that's, I think, probably what we're going to be looking at. There is $3 billion on the table already in the federal government's budget. And we've had the parliamentary treasury talk about how much it's going to cost to fix long-term care. $14 billion is the overall price tag. So 3 is not going to make it, but it's supposed to be to start. So the question here is, what's the role of the feds? I think it's to institute money and give it to the provinces. And I'm hoping that the provinces don't get too uppity about it and are able to say, yes, we want to do this too. This is an important area of collaboration. We will institute these standards. We will require it. And yes, we need your money, federal government, to do it.
Now, Dr. Samir Sinha, who I'm sure you know of, if not know directly, Director of Geriatrics at Sinai Health in Toronto, he worked on these standards. And he himself says his greatest fear is that they will just sit on a shelf. If these standards are not implemented, if in fact they do just sit on a shelf, what's your fear?
We're going to break our system. There's this sense that somehow there's a future time or a later state that we can get this to. We already saw the military have to come into long-term care homes in crisis in Ontario and Quebec, 2 of our wealthiest and most well-provisioned provinces. They couldn't handle it. We know that budgets are broken in long-term care homes because they've had to spend extra money to live up for COVID requirements, and we're down 30% staffing. We were short before. So we are in a crisis state right now. So my worry is not just that they'll sit on the shelf, but that the whole system will break because we are not implementing what we know is the right thing to do.
Laura Tamblyn Watts, always good to speak with you. Thank you for this.
Thank you.